An Iowa Democratic Party audit found that the Democratic National Committee was guilty of meddling in the Iowa caucuses earlier this year, which caused a delay in reporting the results.
Not the first time the DNC has caused problems in these caucuses. As journalist Glenn Greenwald notes, in 2016, the DNC's top 5 officials were forced to resign after proof of their plan to try to prevent Bernie Sanders from ultimately defeating Hillary Clinton. That was all, of course, published by WikiLeaks. Journalist and co-founder of The Intercept, Glenn Greenwald, joins us now to explain how the DNC was the catalyst for the chaos that we all watched unfold here during the Iowa caucus. Great to see you, Glenn.
Good to see you, Glenn.
Guys.
All right, so this was all out of an Iowa Democratic Party audit of all of, I'm sure everybody remembers the insanity of the Iowa caucuses this year and how basically at the end of the process, there was just, they recognized that they would never have accurate results and they're like, so we'll just ultimately accept that it was Pete that won. What did this audit ultimately reveal?
Well, I think, I'm not sure everybody does remember, given how much pandemonium there has been over the last year with both the presidential election as well as the pandemic and everything else that has happened. The reason it was so striking was because this was their first caucus after 2016, when there was obviously so much mistrust that arose over the DNC's role in the primary process. And it was the same candidate, Bernie Sanders, who seemed to be prejudiced by the mismanagement of the Iowa caucus in 2020, as was the victim of the much more nefarious shenanigans throughout all of 2016. And it's exactly what you said. It got to the point where not only were there 2 or 3 days of a delay for a caucus when you normally expect the results that night, but when the results finally did come, nobody trusted it. There had been all kinds of game playing with coin flipping, with wrong counts being entered into the system that wasn't really working. There were Democratic operatives who had just created this app. And this study demonstrated that it was not the fault of the Iowa State Party, as they tried to say, but was the fault, yet again, of the national DNC under Tom Perez.
Yeah, and Glenn, I'm reading some of this audit, and what they point to in particular was this shadow app, which was demanded by the DNC to be put in place by the Iowa Democratic Party a week before the election, which is what contributed to their multiple problems. And that app itself actually had a lot of connections, financing, and what more to many establishment Democratic officials. And none of this has ever still been addressed by the DNC.
Yeah, on some level, they deserve almost points for candor by calling it the shadow app and by just, overtly linking it to just the sleaziest operatives and the sewer of Democratic Party politics, the people who obviously were devoted to Hillary Clinton's win and then the win of anybody other than Bernie Sanders. So whether it was an overt conspiracy or not, it was perfectly constructed to destroy confidence in the process. And you would think they would have been particularly sensitive to not doing that after 2016. And the thing I always come back to, Sagar, is, I've written about this before. Here in Brazil, where I live, there's a comparable size of voting population, even though the population is somewhat smaller than the U.S., the fact that they're mandatory voting, automatic registration, a voting age of 16. And what happens here is people go to the polls, even for national elections in the morning. The polls close at 6 o'clock. It's held on Sunday, so no one has to have work conflicts, or very few people. And by 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock that evening, all of the votes are fully counted. And it's not as though Brazil is renowned globally for being this mastermind of organizational efficiency. Quite the contrary, and yet they managed to count all their votes. A much richer country like the United States has systems in place that seemingly by design ensure that there's just constant confusion. It takes weeks to count votes. And I think within that confusion and uncertainty and that those constant imperfections lie the ability to manipulate the process one way or the other. And I think that's why there's so much valid mistrust in how the Democratic Party conducts elections.
Yeah, which is part of why you end up with this broader situation now of 82% of Trump voters not buying the results of the election because of that, mistrust in our system over time. Glenn, why does this matter? Because ultimately, look, Joe Biden won. It wasn't particularly close. After Super Tuesday, it was basically all over. You had this mass coalescing around him. But, if we take ourselves back to that time, it's never been the case that the winner of Iowa and the winner of New Hampshire failed to ultimately win the Democratic nomination. Yet this time, Bernie won the popular vote, won the most votes in Iowa, won the most votes in New Hampshire. And I think part of the story of why he didn't get the momentum and the bump out of that he should have, part of it's a media story. They tried to be like, actually, Amy Klobuchar was the real winner of New Hampshire, and actually Pete Buttigieg is the real frontrunner here. There was that game playing, but part of what enabled them to do that was because of this incredible bungling of the Iowa caucuses.
Absolutely. And remember that not only did Bernie win New Hampshire, but then he destroyed everybody in the third election, which was in Nevada, in the Nevada caucus. And so if somebody wins the first three elections of a primary season, it is very, very difficult, even with all kinds of establishment maneuvering, to destroy the narrative that they are likely to be the nominee. And I think that you're right that by denying Sanders or anybody the media storyline on that evening to have won Iowa and then go into New Hampshire, win New Hampshire, and then blow everybody out in one of the most impressive multiracial working class wins in Nevada, I think that, we'll never know for certain what the counterfactual is, but it's very easy to see that it would have looked much different heading into Super Tuesday or even into South Carolina. And I think that you're absolutely right. We shouldn't minimize the importance, because Joe Biden did ultimately win, of the impact that bungling, if you want to be generous about how you describe it, ultimately had on the outcome of the primary.
Yeah.
I think that is very well said,
Very well
Glenn.
said, sir.
Great to have you as always.
Thank you, Glenn.
Good to be with you guys.
Coming up, Americans will be getting the first dose of the coronavirus vaccine today, just as the number of COVID deaths nears 300,000. We're going to talk about that when Rising continues.